Okay, great. Well, let's get started. So firstly, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today for ICTI CARE's webinar, an introduction to responsible sourcing in the toy industry. We're delighted to be joined by over 100 registered webinar delegates today from across Europe, the Americas and Asia. So a very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you're joining us from. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, etc. And really, the purpose of today's webinar is to deepen your understanding of responsible sourcing and corporate social responsibility as it applies to the toy industry. So today we're going to be explaining ICTI CARE's role in the ethical manufacturing of toys, and we'll, at the end, we aim to leave you with 3 recommendations or takeaways, if you like, that you can take away in your own responsible sourcing management. So speakers today will include myself. I'm Mark Robertson. I'm Director of Communications and Stakeholder Relations at ICTI CARE. But you'll also be hearing from my colleague Tom Van Haren, who's Senior Advisor Responsible Sourcing at ICTI CARE. So there'll be 2 of us speaking today. And we aim to speak for around 40 minutes and then leave some time at the end of today's session for questions. All of your microphones are muted, but you can ask a question at any point during the presentations using the text box on the right-hand side of your screens, and we'll aim to answer these questions at the end of our main presentations. I should point out today that today's session is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you at the end of the session in case you or a colleague want to listen again. Okay, great. So let's get started. So really, just beginning firstly with an introduction to us. So for those of us that you might not know who we are, ICTI CARE, here's a very brief introduction to us. So ICTI CARE is the ethical supply chain program for the global toy industry. We're a not-for-profit organisation, we're fully independent, and really our core mission is to protect and enhance the lives of workers. And really this objective underpins everything that we do. Globally, there's around about 1,100 toy factories which are ICTI CARE certified, and these span 12 countries and represent over 600,000 workers. At the top of the supply chain, more than 1,500 toy brands and retailers, both large and small, use our program to monitor supply chain risks and improve standards. So that's a little bit of information on us. But before we start, I think it's worth really reflecting on what do we mean by responsible sourcing. And as you can see from the screen, responsible sourcing can mean many things to many people, and there's lots of names, acronyms, concepts, themes which are regularly used to describe it. But really, ICTI CARE's definition focuses on improving ethical standards in the global toy industry supply chain, and working with toy brands, toy retailers, and manufacturers to create safe working environments which treat workers with dignity and respect. That's our definition. And really, building supply chain transparency, we see, is very much a vital first step in this process. Because without transparency, it's impossible to understand where the risks are in your supply chain, especially beyond Tier 1 suppliers in your extended supply chain. Which is why we're developing new tools to help buyers gain greater visibility of supply chain risks and help them manage these. And at the factory level, a lot of our work, when we look at responsible sourcing, is very much orientated around working hard to encourage factories to be open and honest and disclose information and challenges they face in a collaborative manner. That's a bit of introduction. I'm now going to hand you over to Tom.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody to our webinar. It's great to have everybody joining from all over the world, and hopefully this will give you some great insights into responsible sourcing and corporate social responsibility, especially as it applies to the toy industry. As Mark mentioned, there's a lot of different reasons people use sustainability programs or corporate social responsibility programs, and we sort of wanted to get sort of some best practices out there, and we'll come to some recommendations at the end. But really identifying at first sort of the 4 or 5 key elements of a CSR program that we have quite often here. So the first one that a lot of good corporate social responsibility programs or responsible sourcing programs have are supplier code of conduct. So something that comes across various instances are pushing down through the supply chain important information on, say, labor, working hours, and other various forms and conditions. The other part of a way that responsible sourcing works is that, especially in the toy industry, is that companies ask that suppliers participate in the ICTI CARE process, and we'll go over what the process is and how we audit and do certifications in that sense. Some of the more advanced features of a CSR program might include supply chain mapping, try to understand where you're sourcing your materials from, and then beyond that there's a risk and impact assessment. So trying to understand where you're sourcing from and the countries that you're sourcing from, what are the risks to your supply chain. And in the purpose of today is, for us to give you information, but we also want this to be an interactive seminar. So we've got a series of different polls and surveys that we're asking. So one of the first favors that we're going to ask everyone is just to think about your own responsible sourcing program and what elements you might already have in place of the 4 that we mentioned. So we'll bring up the poll here, and we'll give everybody a few moments to answer. But just if you've got different parts of a responsible sourcing program, it'd be great for us to hear where you are in this sort of journey in terms of responsible sourcing. So we'll give some folks some time to answer this. And again, this allows us some great insight so that we can develop better programming and develop a great webinar series for everyone here going forward.
Whilst we're just waiting for the results to come in, do still feel free to submit any questions to us on the right-hand side.
Sure, we're getting some great participation today. Again, we want these to be interactive. Questions, comments, all throughout the session today are pretty useful. Got the closing seconds here, so if you haven't responded, it'd be great to get your input. We'll close in about 5 seconds here, and then we'll share with everybody the results here. All right, great. The results looks like a pretty good the spread in terms of understanding of responsible sourcing. So many of you, or at least a majority of you, have some sort of supplier code of conduct in place. Great to see from an ICTI CARE perspective that just a little less than half require their suppliers to be a part of the process. Supply chain mapping and risk assessment, again, those are sort of the advanced part of a CSR program, and it looks like again, that supply chain mapping, it is difficult when you try to get down to the raw materials, especially when you're dealing with toys, and that's where a lot of our work is going to be focused in the future. And for those of you who don't have a responsible sourcing program, or may not, this may not be what you're aware of right now, it's a journey, and we're here to help you on that way. So thanks again for everybody who participated in that survey there, and this really helps us inform our programming going forward. Again, the next part is, again, a bit of an interactive scenario which you might come across as a professional in the toy industry, especially if you're dealing with responsible sourcing or quality control. So we'd like you to sit back and think of this scenario, and then we'll ask you your opinion here. So let's say you're sitting at your desk and your boss sends you an email, a news article that there's a child laborer who's died as a result of an accident at his toy factory. And your boss wants to know if your company uses this factory and if it's ever had a social audit. So you're sitting back and you're thinking about how to respond to this question, and then moments later you get a call from a reporter who's asking you to comment on this incident. So in this scenario, which you may or may not have come across in your experience and work, we'd like to get a sense of what you might be. How do you respond to this situation? If you were in this getting these emails, how would you respond? So we're going to open up another quick poll here. Do you have any idea on who's going to find out whether you source from this factory, or do you know the process of how to find out because you've done some supply chain mapping? If you're not requiring social audits, then it'd be good to find out. It'd be very difficult to find out how your factory has performed in the past, or you know exactly where to get that information from. So again, it's really useful for us to understand where companies are in this journey on responsible sourcing and how they might respond to these scenarios as they go forward. And we'll give everybody, again, a chance to vote and be interactive here, and then we'll discuss the results, and Mark will go over some of the issues and scenarios that we see in real life in terms of supply chain disruptions. So again, thanks for everybody being really interactive. We've got almost half of you already voting. We'll give it a few more seconds because we want to get to those recommendations and really get everybody some great information here. So give it about another 5 seconds. All right, great. So it looks like it's great to see that people know that they have a process and they can find out exactly where that toy factory was if their boss comes in and finds some issues with some child labor. For those of you who don't have any idea or don't currently require an audit, again, this is part of why we're doing this webinar series, to help you think about these issues and what you might do when you encounter them. And for those of you that work closely with us, we're glad that we can keep you informed on these issues here. So now, Mark, I think you'll talk about some of the other issues that might come up. This was a fake scenario, but there are some real things that do happen in the world that our industry faces.
Thanks, Tom. Really interesting results from the survey there. So there are indeed major and minor supply chain incidents, some of which you may be familiar with, others not. And really, looking back over the last 10, 20 years, some stand out as significant events, but there are others as well. So relevant to our conversation today, the Michaela Olfactory fire, which occurred in Thailand in 1993, really was a significant event that perhaps brought supply chain sustainability and ethical manufacturing in the toy industry to the fore, and did kickstart quite a lot of focus within the toy industry on supply chain risks, leading brands and retailers that sell toys or make toys to question the risks that exist in their supply chain, and really start to understand the levels of transparency that they did or didn't have around those. Other major events following on from that have been a major fire which occurred in Bangladesh in 2012, which is the Csr factory fire. Again, sadly lots of lives lost in that, and many injured too. Perhaps one of the most significant supply chain events which occurred in recent-ish years was the collapse of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. Tragically, over 1,000 people lost their lives and many more injured. And then, of course, in China specifically, more recently, there was the Tianjin explosion. So we mention these today because obviously these are major events which have cause significant disruption and pose significant risk to companies. And obviously, in terms of doing the right thing, that's certainly issues you need to be looking at. But alongside these, there are lots of other smaller day-to-day issues to consider as well. And really, to the point with that, I'm not going to read through each of these, but you can see there's a good selection of issues which certainly our program focuses on, and any responsible sourcing toy program needs to consider. And indeed, any of these could make the headlines and do make the headlines. And so now, Tom, I think you're going to focus a bit on taking some of these issues forward.
Sure. So as Mark mentioned, sometimes it's the small issues that come up and bite companies, especially when they're being asked questions, and the worst response that can be given is "I don't know" or we're not familiar with the situation. So, the point of today's webinar is to really give you a sense of what a strong policy is and some best practices. And in our mind, a strong responsible sourcing policy can, in many ways, help prevent a serious issue from occurring in the first place by mitigating those risks and identifying risky suppliers and factories in that sense. But when they do occur, a strong responsible sourcing policy can help companies react, respond, and then ultimately continuously improve their operations. So, again, the elements of a strong responsible sourcing policy that sort of focus on that react, respond, and improve framework, the first step is really allowing buyers to identify risky suppliers, know what you're getting into before you even choose to source from a specific factory, whether they have an ICTI CARE certification or not, or if, any number of other countless social auditing schemes that are out there. It also helps you identify key internal and external stakeholders. As we mentioned that in that scenario before, if you didn't know who to contact, hopefully as a result of today, you'll start thinking about, well, what is the process if something goes wrong? Am I the one responsible for this, or is there somebody else that can help me find out this information? And who needs this information in the first place? Who needs to be communicated with in order to get the right information out there? A strong policy also helps you respond quickly to disruptions in your supply chain. If you know risky suppliers or come across audit reports that have negative implications, you can reach out to your buying teams or your agents to find alternatives, especially when it comes to peak production season. And in the end, and really what we're hoping to aim for, and the reason that we exist, is that a policy will help you create opportunities within the toy industry to collaborate and tackle root causes. Part of the information that we get from our audits and the aggregate data and the interactive sessions that we do with factories is to really get a sense of what are the causes of the strikes or the protests or common chemical issues that are happening in toy factories, and really working within the industry to share information so that we can prevent them from occurring in the first place. So again, these are some key elements for a responsible sourcing policy, and they'll tie into our recommendations at the end. So now we're going to switch gears and throw things a little bit back in time, and Mark will give a little bit of history of how we got to where we are today.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so just to provide a bit of background and a very brief history, if you like, of ethical manufacturing in the toy industry, many of which you probably may already know, but worth recapping. So really, the roots of ethical toy manufacturing go back to 1995, when the International Council of Toy Industries established a code of business practices for ethical manufacturing. This was in part of the major fire I mentioned earlier, the Csr toy factory in Vietnam, but also really in response to greater scrutiny from on the supply chain in the toy industry from NGOs, civil society groups, the media, customers, and even the investment community, all of which has certainly escalated since then. So that was established in '95. But really, problems after the code was established, problems then emerged as toy brands began to implement their own individual systems to implement the ICTI Code of Business Practices. And really, this was a problem in that it led to huge amounts of duplication of effort and meant that factories were often overburdened with audits. So multiple brands requesting multiple audits at the same factory, all asking for the same thing. And this, of course, meant that manufacturers or factories were spending all their time being audited and leaving few time, or little time, I should say, on resources to actually fix those problems which are identified. So in 2002, the CARE process was established as a kind of worldwide framework and auditing process to implement the ICTI code, which is kind of the background to our organization now. And really, the CARE process was about reducing duplication and of audit and lessening the burden of toy factories and pulling it all together so that the industry could act together to tackle the same issues in a similar way with a similar methodology. A few years later, the ICTI CARE Foundation, which is the organization we're all from today in the call, was established as an independent, not-for-profit organization to oversee and implement the code. So that's the background to us and a little bit about the industry. And really, to bring us up to 2007, since we were created, we've seen significant growth and market coverage of the ICTI CARE program. So actually, by 2007, almost 60% of global toy sales were covered or came from, if you like, ICTI CARE certified suppliers or brands in our program. So significant growth and great coverage, and then bringing it really up to date to where we are now. ICTI CARE today, particularly over the last 12 months, we've really started to focus on how we can move the program forward. So where we are now, ICTI CARE has grown into a global program. We're used by more than 1,500 toy brands and retailers around the world. As I mentioned earlier, we certify 1,100 factories over that now, actually, representing 600,000 workers working globally. But really, the past 12 months, for us in particular, have seen some quite exciting changes at ICTI CARE, really as we look to refresh and develop the program and take it forward. And I won't go through all of these highlights on screen now, but just to pick a few, certainly in 2015, our new CEO, Carmel Giblin, joined the organisation. And that's an exciting step forward as Carmel brings an exciting and bold ambition for our program and where we're going to take it. Alongside that, we've strengthened our capabilities further with the appointment of new senior leaders and a new senior leadership team, and we've made other kind of key investments in the team in China and Hong Kong, as well as other parts of the world. I suppose other things to mention that are different about work we've been doing recently. Certainly, we're doing a lot more collaboration now with the NGO community and civil society groups. This is about forming new partnerships to further our reach and deepen the work we're doing. Some examples of this would be a project we're about to embark on with BSR to focus on women's empowerment in global supply chains. But then locally, increasingly, we're working with partners in China, such as an organization called CSR to tackle left behind children and child labor issues, and other local partners. So we're already stepping up our partnership work, but also where allegations are made by NGOs against ICTI CARE certified factories, we're already kind of stepping up our response to those. So that in part is about immediately conducting follow-up and thorough and robust investigations where we feel we need to, and then publishing the results of those investigations and working with NGOs to actually tackle them. Other changes or developments certainly exist around sharing data, knowledge and insights from the program to really help the industry move forward collectively. Some examples of this are publications. We've recently launched a new blog writing on issues such as the Modern Day Slavery Act through to supply chain risks in China, so we certainly urge you to take a look at that. Earlier this week, we published a guide for toy factories on avoiding common recruitment pitfalls as we kind of reach peak production season in China. So I'd urge you all to look at that. I think that's actually available as a handout on the right-hand side. So we certainly want to and will be doing a lot more to share our perspectives and insights. And really, so moving forward from that, really, we just wanted to share and quickly talk through, if you like, the kind of fundamental principles which underpin all of our work at ICTI CARE. So if you like, this is the ICTI CARE Code of Business Practices, and these are the kind of key headline areas that we look at. Again, I won't go through all of them now, but really these core principles haven't changed too much since we were founded. But beneath each of these, we're developing a program to look at how we can effectively tackle each of them in more detail. These are kind of underpinned by the ILO core labour standards, and essentially, very much focused on social sustainability issues as they apply to the toy industry supply chain. And now, Tom, I think you're going to run through some more information on the kind of how the process works at the detail level.
Sure. So for many of you, this may already be very familiar with you, but we just wanted to give you a refresher on how the process works from a 20,000-foot view, and all of this information in the detailed 97-page guide is available online. But for the most part, a factory goes through our process by initially applying. Generally, this is the result of a brand or a retailer or an agent asking them to go through the ICTI CARE certification process. At that point, we assign an audit firm. So we use 7 audit firms that are all available online, but these include BV, Intertek, SGS, UL, TUV, Rhineland, and some others. So the system will automatically and randomly assign an audit firm, and which the audit firm will then arrange an audit. And all of these audits are unannounced. So all ICTI CARE audits are unannounced, whether they're done by an audit firm or done by our own quality control team. So the auditor will go in, generally, probably from registration to the initial audit can take anywhere between 2 and 5 months, depending on the work of each audit firm. But we're working on ways to streamline that where possible. The audit results are written up, and then our team reviews the report. If we make determinations that there's a follow-up needed, or there are some violations that have happened, or non-compliances, the follow-ups will take place. So again, that might have to require a follow-up audit with an auditor on the ground, or it can be done via a desktop review where the factory will send the corrected information to the auditor and say, look, we've corrected this policy, we've added these signs, and then the auditor can sign off. Again, we review the report, and if no follow-ups are needed and everything is great, they get the seal. We make sure all the accounts are settled in terms of the audit firm, and then we ultimately issue the seal with a seal number that everybody, is public information who has a seal, and then from that point on, we go through a progress audit. So from the time that a seal is issued, a factory must actually undergo what we call a progress audit to make sure that it was not just a one-and-done situation. They just didn't pass it one time and they're good for a year. So that progress audit will occur with between 2 and 6 months of the seal being issued, and again, it sort of goes through that process of the audit firm there. So again, it's a process that is sort of consuming for the factory, but it really focuses on all of those issues that Mark laid out in the ICTI Code of Business Practices. So again, just some quick audit facts, just to recap. We've got the 7 accredited auditing firms. All of our audits are unannounced, and the audit scope is predetermined by the factory size. So depending on the size of the factory, in terms of the number of workers, the initial audit can take anywhere between 3 and 9 days. And again, that's all laid out in our protocol handbook, which is available online. So one of the common questions that we get are sort of what of our zero tolerance issues, and what happens when a factory or when an auditor encounters one of these issues in the factory. So you can see a lot of the zero tolerance issues here: child labor, or forced labor, or physical abuse. And in essence, when an auditor discovers one of these and then writes it up in a report, our team reviews it, and one of several things can happen. Either a factory can lose its seal, so if it had a previous certification seal, that seal can be terminated. The factory could be put on probation for an issue that is zero tolerance or a highly critical violation. It can appear on our probation list, which would require that it could undergo at least an additional 3 surveillance audits in that year in order to maintain its certification. Or it can be terminated entirely from the process. If it doesn't have a seal, it can be terminated from the process for a period of up to 1 year. We do have an appeals process in place, and our technical advisory committee reviews all of the recommendations for terminations in the end. So again, we do cover the Code of Business Practices, but then also have a list of these issues that are zero tolerance. But factories aren't going to be perfect. We understand that. So there are going to be a lot of issues that range from minor, major, and critical. So that's why we've developed some training and capacity building programs that Mark is going to talk about to help the factories really engage and take that next step in terms of responsible sourcing.
Thanks, Tom. And in the interest of time, we won't run through all of the capability building programs we offer, but just to pick out a few to give you a sense of these today. So really to support factories at different stages of the ethical manufacturing process, we deliver a kind of comprehensive range of training programs for factories, principally in China, but increasingly in other parts of the world. We're going to be looking at rolling them out there as well, and also delivering via webinar. And really, these range from the following. Firstly, we offer training and capability building sessions aimed at factories that are starting out in the process. So we recognize that for some suppliers, ethical manufacturing might be a new concept, or they may know very little about the audit process or indeed ICTI CARE. So we have created a new syllabus for factories which really covers off all those issues. So what is responsible sourcing? Why are my customers asking me to be audited and to adopt ethical manufacturing principles? What are the benefits that this offers to my business? Why should I do it? And then also, what's entailed in the ICTI CARE process. So that's very much the kind of introductory session. We also run a series of round table sessions that bring factory owners and senior managers together to focus on a particular issue or indeed address particular challenges. They're kind of round table discussion sessions, but alongside that we also run a series of regular training sessions on ICTI CARE and how the process works. And that's something certainly that we'll continue to do and continue to build in response to feedback from factories. We've also developed quite recently a series of new e-learning tools for factories, recognizing we want to reach as many factories as possible. The first module is focused on improving management worker dialogue, and also modules to help factories support their workers to better adapt to life in cities and living or working in factories. We've also produced comic books quite recently in partnership with an organization called Little Bird in China. These are in Chinese, to help migrant workers adapt to city life. So these are resources which have been distributed in and amongst factories for workers, and we've got some really good feedback on those. We're also, as part of our capability building program, or looking beyond compliance, seeing how we can start to really get to grips with some of the more kind of systemic issues which exist in China, but which are very relevant to our program. So one of the major challenges in China is the issue of left behind children. And this is very situations whereby parents have to migrate often from rural communities in China to large cities to work, but unfortunately are unable to bring often unable to bring their children with them. And there's many reasons why around when that happens, but it's a very large challenge in China. So actually there's currently 61 million children who are classed as left behind children in China. So the figures are staggering, and it's a very, very large challenge. Actually, interestingly, of that 61 million, a recent survey suggested that around about 70 or 80% of that 61 million children don't see their parents for over a year. So they may go a year or even 18 months without seeing their parents. So huge issue, because the children who are left behind are often left to be brought up by grandparents or informally brought up. So it's a challenge that China is certainly placing an emphasis on, and that we're looking at in our program. So to tackle the issue, we're trialing two things beginning this summer. Firstly, our parenting skills workshops, which will take place at factories. So basically, these are workshops or classes which will be voluntary, but they'll be there for factory workers to participate in. And really, they're all focused on helping and supporting factory workers to be better at remote parenting, if you like. So they focus on issues such as how to have better conversations with your children on the phone, how to engage with them at times like Chinese New Year. And they've actually, the syllabus we're looking at is quite inventive in the techniques that we're going to be trialing. And actually, we're looking to replicate good practice from other industries, and we've seen that the kind of past experience from other sectors tells us that when you look at this and you provide these very popular training sessions at factories, it really helps to boost morale. The worker turnover often drops because workers appreciate them. So and moreover, it's tackling a key issue. Starting this summer, we're also going to be trialing factory summer-friendly spaces. So these are basically about providing opportunities really to reunite families and at the factory level. So creating opportunities for children to travel, to be with their parents, and obviously in a safe environment at the factory for a period of time over summer. And that's quite a challenge, because we have to be very confident that the conditions are correct, and that that logistically we have things right at the factory level to make this happen. But it's an exciting project, and we look forward to sharing more information with you on that. We're partnering with an organisation, TCR to deliver this. And again, experience from them suggests that these kind of initiatives really do go some distance in terms of improving the mental health and well-being of workers, which is very much what we want to be focusing on. Another resource that we provide outside the compliance aspects of our program is the ICTI CARE Workers Helpline. So this has actually been running for over 5 years now, and since that time we've actually helped over 11,000 workers, and actually factory owners as well, since launch. So essentially it's a free, confidential hotline that, again, we work in partnership with a local NGO in China to run it. And the helpline provides advice and guidance to workers on day-to-day issues, and also their rights and responsibilities in relation to local and national Chinese law, but also in relation to the ICTI CARE program as well. So the kind of the top four issues that are often we receive calls about are around dismissal, termination, delayed payment, terms around resignation, and wages and calculation. Just another quick point on this. Interestingly, the helpline is increasingly being used by factory owners who are using it as a resource to better understand the kind of issues their workers face, and better foster better relationships with their employees as well. So another popular resource that we continue to promote and will promote further. And now, Tom, I think you're going to talk a little bit more about the Community Brands Plus program. Building on
Thanks, Mark. So as Mark's mentioned, we offer some great training and capability programs for our factories. But recently, back in October, we launched a new level of training and technology platform for our brands and retailers, and many of you on this call may have already participated in our Committed Brands program, and we've launched the Plus program to sort of take companies and toy manufacturers to the next level. We don't expect any company to be perfect when it comes to responsible sourcing, but we do expect a commitment, an involvement, and overall an improvement in the lives of workers. So our Committed Brands program really focuses on some issues that can positively enhance the lives of workers, but also have great returns for the companies that participate in this program. So some of the features that differentiate our Committed Brands Plus program from our basic program is the launch of our ICPS, which is our new online responsible sourcing platform, where you can connect with factories that you may source from, and you can monitor, manage, and improve by reviewing their audit reports, sending them messages, and connecting with their corrective action plans, and seeing what's really going on the ground in those factories. You can also use the ICPS as a responsible sourcing tool in the sense of finding out if you're looking for a new product, you can find out which factories already have a seal or a certification seal based on the product type that they're making, or the region that they are, or the country that they're in. Using the data from the audit reports and the corrective action plans, we're able to tackle root causes. If we see a big trend in a particular region, such as Shantou or in the Guangdong province in China, or in other areas of the world in which we operate, we can send our special investigation team to do quality control audits to address these issues. Also, factories that are connected to our Committed Brands Plus members get early access to training programs and other various capability building programs, and we're also working to strengthen stakeholder engagement. So those Plus members, they'll get our enhanced briefings on NGOs and how to address issues when supply chain disruptions happen. So the Plus program is really a great feature for those brands that have already committed. We'd like to thank those brands that have already committed, and you can see those some big names there. But hopefully that we'd like to convince you all to get more information. You can contact myself or Mark, or one of our emails. They'll be at the end of the presentation, or just go to our website where you can download more information about the Committed Brands Plus program.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So we wanted to share some of our insights from what we see in China and what our data tells us. And as Tom was saying, as part of the Committed Brands Plus program, we've been deepening our capabilities around data mining and what we can offer in terms of reporting. And really, China still, before I start, really just to re-emphasize that China still is very much the kind of core focus of our program. 93% of our certified factories are in China. Whilst we don't see this changing anytime soon, we are seeing activity outside the country, which we'll talk about in a moment, but very much so, China does remain a kind of core focus for us. Looking across the audit data and the non-compliance issues raised by the thousands of audits that we conduct annually, here really you can see on screen are the kind of top 5 issues that we're consistently identifying at the supplier site level. So probably not surprising, but environmental health and safety remains the kind of top concern, if you like, identified by audits. Fire safety and protection issues being the second kind of critical issue that we're picking up consistently. Working hours, is still an issue which kind of remains at the forefront of audits and the kind of the feedback we're getting from the audit data as well. Although, as you'll see in a second, there's interesting movement around that. Wages and compensation, still an issue and still something that we're very much focused on at the factory level. And then the kind of fifth kind of key area is around welfare issues, so the kind of quality of standard at dormitories, the kind of canteen and food concerns, and medical related issues as well. And interestingly, one of the things we are seeing actually is the workforce demographics change in China just on welfare and dormitories. We're actually increasingly seeing more and more workers living off-site. So dormitories still a key part of toy factories in China, but progressively more, especially younger workers, are looking to find accommodation locally. It's an interesting aside there. So other kind of general insights that we're seeing from across our data really are firstly around female workers. So they still form the kind of vast majority of the workforce at toy factories in China, still around 60%, which creates kind of unique challenges, and hence our focus on capability building programs now and in future to support women. We're finding, interestingly, the average age of toy workers is increasing. So each year we conduct a comprehensive factory survey, and as part of that, and through the audits as well, we collect data relating to age, and we are finding that the average age of workers is increasing. Also, labour costs continue to rise in China. There's lots of issues which are underpinning this, but it's certainly a challenge at the factory level, and it's a trend now that's been continuing for the last few years. A growing investment in lean manufacturing and automation, which creates kind of challenges and opportunities in equal amounts, I think. But again, toys are notoriously difficult to automate given the diversity of products and some of the processes involved, but we are seeing more automation at the factory level. Emerging issues, perhaps, which are relatively new issues, are around student workers. So we've found over the last few years in particular that factories are more and more now starting to use student workers within the workforce. And actually we have picked up forced labour issues surrounding this. So these are situations whereby factories, unbeknownst to them, are using forced student labour. And the reason basically what's happening here is universities or academic institutions in China receive a fee from the factory for employees to work as a kind of internship at the factory level. But the problem is that students, it's not an optional assignment, that students have to work there, and whilst they are paid, in some instances, their graduation is contingent on them completing that work assignment. So it's a mild case, if you like, of forced labour, but a very real one, which we're looking for more and more, educating factories to look for. And once we understand a bit more about the problem, we'll be starting to engage with academic institutions in China to obviously kind of discourage this practice and see if instead we can facilitate more meaningful placements for students that are relevant to their course. And then just quickly to reflect on a few kind of progress areas, if you like. So I think firstly it's worth mentioning that, perhaps looking back over the last decade, conditions generally are improving. So our data tells us that, so the more severe issues around child labour or forced labour more generally, or just general issues, the general kind of direction of travel is towards improvement. And some of the more kind of severe supply chains or more worrisome aspects of health and safety failings are diminishing, although obviously still severe challenges remain. Working hours, again, looking back to the last few years, are relatively stable, whilst wages have increased. And that's kind of, when you look regionally, the picture changes. The general direction of travel is towards moderate increases in wage. Interestingly, working hours in the toy industry generally are actually slightly less than, or workers work fewer hours, I should say, in the toy industry than apparel and electronics. And we know that because of the factory survey data we collect. We're able to benchmark that against other sectors, working with the company we use to run that survey, and we'll soon be running our 2016 survey, so we'll be looking to probe that further. Another final interesting fact really is that 95% of factories now have designated staff responsible specifically for CSR and compliance issues. So that's very much a positive step forward. Okay, so moving on. Whilst our focus is very much in China, and kind of traditionally the industry has been very focused on China as a kind of core manufacturing base for toys, we do recognise that this is changing. And really, as a kind of the final poll for today's webinar, we wanted to get a sense from you as to what you think will be the toy industry's next big responsible sourcing countries outside China. So we've got on screen now the final poll for today's session, and we ask you now to register your vote as to where you think the toy industry manufacturing base might shift beyond China. So we'll just give you a few seconds to vote. I can see the votes coming in thick and fast.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, Mark. It's really great on those insights. I'm glad we're able to share them with the folks on the call, and also it's great that they're sharing insights with us. So we'll give it a few more seconds. I know we don't have all that much time, so we'll go through this poll quickly, then we'll get to our 3 recommendations. And again, feel free to submit any questions and answers when you get a chance. So last few seconds here on the poll, and then we'll switch over to the results here. All right, so it looks like a large majority in Vietnam, which is consistent with what we're finding in terms of the industry, and we've got some basics for an outline on a presentation on sourcing in Vietnam that may be part of our next webinar series. And I know that our CEO Carmel will be over in India later this month to lay some groundwork there. So pretty consistent with what we're finding. So we thank everyone for those insights there. So let's, great insights everybody's sharing, and we've almost reached the end. So now what are we supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with all this information that I've been given today? And we understand that responsible sourcing can sometimes can really be an impossible task, but we're here to help. ICTI CARE is here to help, and we're going to give you 3 recommendations that you can take back and sort of implement and hopefully get the process started here. So the 3 simple steps. Step 1 is think about assigning roles and responsibilities for responsible sourcing in your organization. So think about allocating resources to responsible sourcing. So designating the right person to address these issues. Find out your supply chain map or what your policies are, and then keep in touch with ICTI CARE. Sign up for our webinar series or our newsletter, or consider becoming a Committed Brands Plus member so that we can share critical information and insights with you today, like we did today. Step 2, you can sign up after today's webinar for a complimentary ICTI CARE toy supply chain assessment. We can help you find out how many of your suppliers currently meet the ICTI CARE standards, and these assessments again allow you to map your supply chain and understand where those risks are. You can email either myself or Mark or info@icti-care.org. For that assessment. And the final step, now that after today's webinar, it's a good time to sit down and perhaps create or review your current responsible sourcing policy and supplier code of conduct. You could consider require suppliers to meet the ICTI CARE standards where applicable. And really, the second point is most critical, is to harmonize the process to reduce audit fatigue for suppliers and buyers. It's really try to get one standard or one policy that allows the factories to undergo one audit and get one certification really in order to do business in that sense. So those are the 3 simple steps. There's a recap here, and again, they'll be available in the slides and the recording, and we're happy to discuss more in detail if you reach out to us here. But that sort of concludes my 3 takeaways, and I know, Mark, you've got some announcements, and then we'll do the Q&A to wrap up here.
Yeah, thanks. Just before we do move on to questions very quickly, we just want to point out that our next webinar in our kind of thought leadership series will be focused on modern-day slavery risk in the toy supply chain, and that will be on the 12th of July. And again, as part of the follow-up to today's webinar, you'll have an email with links to how to sign up to that. Great, so let's move on to Q&A. We've got some questions coming in, which is fantastic, and let us move on and ask them. So the first one I'll deal with. The question is there an outlet to contact ICTI CARE to follow up when an audit can be booked or rebooked, or are our audits always surprise visits? So the simple answer is no, there isn't. So all our audits are surprise visits or unannounced, and there are no means by which a factory or anyone for that matter can have prior, can view that information or access that. And we find that works. Obviously, it works very well. It means that because our audits are unannounced, factories obviously don't know, they can't prepare for when we're coming, and it's a kind of core tenet, if you like, of our program. Another question: what's the difference between the process of CSR programs for toys like ICTI CARE and other CSR programs like Method, BSDI, etc.? So I think, firstly, really, one difference is, or one unique selling point, if you like, of the ICTI CARE program is the fact that we're specialists. So that means that we're often larger, and our coverage of toys in the toy sector is much broader than other programs. Of course, the ICTI CARE program is it's a specialist program for the toy industry. That means the staff that we employ in our technical team in China and Hong Kong are specialists. They know the industry very well. They understand toy manufacturing and toy factories very well. And really that means that they're able to go into factories along with our auditors and understand the processes, understand the challenges. So I think the part of the answer to that question is the expertise and experience we bring as being a specialist. Of course, by its very nature, ICTI CARE is we run a certification scheme. So that means that a factory simply cannot get certified unless it's reached the standards that we require under our Code of Business Conduct. So what that means is all the non-compliances which an audit may generate have to be and will be addressed before a factory becomes ICTI CARE certified. Alongside that, there's obviously the kind of programs we run that we've kind of alluded to today to build capability and capacity at the factory level, be that tackling left behind children, the training and development programs that we offer, and all the other issues which we're increasingly looking to address. So hopefully that shed some light on that question.
Thanks, Mark. We're getting some great questions, so I'll take this one here. Question is the confidential hotline required to be made available to all workers in ICTI certified factories? After a factory registers within the program, we send them what we call the care cards that have the information with the hotline, as well as some basic information about the expectations of our program. And this card must be distributed to all of the workers in the factory so that when the auditor comes, they are checking to see if the card has been distributed and posted throughout the factory. So, and if it's not, if it's discovered that it hasn't been distributed, then it's considered a non-compliance, and then the factory must pay for additional cards to be sent and distributed to its workers. So the hotline is really useful in that sense. We're also working with some companies, not only for the workers in the factories, but also construction workers that build toy factories, that they can also call in. And I don't exactly know the numbers, Mark, but I know that not even non-toy factory workers are calling our hotline because they've come across care cards or have been informed about the program and are happy to share that information. And we're able to help and follow up with them on that sense.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Another question we've received is, does ICTI CARE have a presence in India? We don't actually have whilst we have a number of factories that are certified in India, and as we said earlier, we see this as a kind of growth area. We don't actually have staff on the ground there at the moment. However, we're kind of making regular visits to India this year. As Tom mentioned, Kamel Ghibli, our CEO, will be there actually in a few weeks with the technical team. And really, our model, what we're looking at there is to better support the factories that are there already, and those will be no doubt opening shortly. It's to work with partners to help us kind of deliver the program roll out some of the capability building programs we want to do there as well. So we're actually speaking at the moment to Impact, which some of you may know, which is an organization that brings a lot of knowledge around training and development issues in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. So the model will likely be in India that we will have established partners or ICTI CARE representatives, if you like, and then ultimately we'll probably look to develop the team there as and when the toy sector grows.
Yeah, there's one great question which sort of I can answer quite well, in the sense that the question basically, or I guess it's commented that experience has shown that more and more retailers are not accepting ICTI seals or reports and demand that their own audits or codes of conduct be followed. And part of the reason that I joined ICTI CARE back in March was to go on a listening tour of these brands and retailers throughout the world and try and get them to understand, try to find out what the differences are. Why are they not accepting ICTI CARE? Can we get to some harmonization where the toy factory only has to go through one audit, and that will be sufficient for everyone? And in a lot of these conversations, the differences are very minor to some extent. It's more about the way things are written, or sort of technical points within the audit process. And we're really trying to sort of benchmark our program against what these other codes of conduct are asking. And we're trying to improve ours where possible, and then also helping these companies improve theirs where possible, so that we can sort of work on some mutual recognition of these audits, and again, overall reduce that burden for those factories, because it does become quite costly for the factories. And that actually relates to another question that was asked about how much it costs for a factory to get an ICTI CARE or go through the ICTI CARE process. So all of our fees are available online, and we have, I won't go through them all, but we have fixed audit day rates of about at $500 per day, and a new factory registration will start at about $1,500 per day. So those costs tend to add up over time, so we want to try and reduce that burden on that factory within the toy industry. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. If you do submit a question that we don't get to, we'll keep track of it. Or if you have something that comes up after that you need an answer to, you can email myself or Mark, and we'll be able to help you with that.
Just another question that's recently come in. We're basically relating to whether or not the ICTI standard is becoming more difficult to pass, and whether or not the standard is aimed, more at larger factories rather than small toy factories. In short, to come to the kind of latter part of that question first, if it makes sense. No, it's not. The program is very much designed for factories of all shapes and sizes. And as we alluded to earlier, the audits that we conduct will kind of flex according to the size of the factory site. And we take great care to ensure that the ICTI CARE process is available to factories, no matter what size they are, and also increasingly no matter where they're based. So whilst it's a challenge supporting factories outside of China until we reach a critical mass, increasingly we're looking at ways to support factories in kind of emerging toy manufacturing bases. In terms of the standard becoming more difficult to pass, I mean, our standards are deliberately quite high, and they're often quite challenging for toy factories. I think that's the strength of our program. There haven't been significant changes to make the program more difficult. Of course, we do review the program from time to time to ensure that we capture new issues and best practice, and we'll certainly be doing that as we continue to evolve and develop the program going forward. But at a basic level, no significant changes in relation to favouring large or small factories. Also, to help, we're increasing the support that we offer to factories so that they don't just feel like auditing is something that's done to them. Alongside this, we want to support them, increase their capabilities to understand the issues that underpin some of the root causes, and really understand more about the process.
All right, and the last question, and then we'll sort of, it ties into our wrap-up here, basically how to get access to this webinar material. So following the webinar, we will be finalizing our recording and sending out the slides as well as the recording to all of our attendees and to anybody who wasn't able to make it today. Some of you, after today's webinar, will get a random survey, and then some of you may get it in the email with the webinar recording. And that survey will help us, we're asking for any insights and topics that you want to hear about in the future. As Mark mentioned, on July 12th, we have our webinar on modern-day slavery, but we want to hear about the topics that that interest you, and really it'd be helpful to get survey feedback from everyone. So if you can take some time along with your busy day to fill out that. But on my end, it's about 11:30 here in the East Coast of the U.S., so I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to us today. We hope it was informative, and that that everyone will keep in touch, and we'll be traveling around the world and reaching out and hopefully meeting you all at some point in the future.
Thanks very much, everyone.